Hello and welcome to the education video by Integrity Capital on how to fill out a rent roll. So first off, a rent roll is really a detailed understanding of an income producing property's tenants and where the income is coming from and all the particulars. So first of all, we'll start off here on the left side where we'll put the actual unit number. Typically, the tenant will have a unit number that they'll be in the actual location. And so you'll identify and input that in this section over here that corresponds to the actual tenant's name, which will go in this field and every field thereafter down the line. And the tenant name, you might actually have how it's on the lease or their actual name as presented as their business. So for example, it might be XYZ LLC DBA or doing business as the yogurt shop or something to that effect. So just notate that in the line here and make sure you get the proper name. Next over here, you're going to look at the square footage. That is the actual space they're in, how large is their space. And again, you can typically generate this from the lease. They might even have their own rent roll they give you, and you can input that information right here. Over here, you'll notice that this section, you'll put the actual square footage for a space that might not have a tenant. From time to time, you'll have these locations that won't actually have a tenant in it, and you'll put vacant, whatever the unit number is, and as opposed to putting the square footage here, well, you would still put the square footage here, but you also put the square footage over here so that down at the bottom it will total up how much of the total square footage of the building is actually vacant. Is it 10%, 15%? But you'll want to make sure you put the square footage here, again, only if the space that you're looking at is vacant. Over here, the next field is it says monthly rent. So what is the base rent they are obligated to pay every month? Now remember that this does not include yet the CAM expenses that they're responsible for too. In many instances on a tenant, they'll pay a base rent, just $500 a month, and then they might be responsible for a percentage of the total expenses for the location based on their square footage they have. So they might have 10% of the total space of the whole center, and so they're responsible for 10% of the expenses. In these yellow fields, these are automatically calculated, and so it will automatically calculate based on here an annualized number, and it will total at the bottom. It'll automatically calculate the rent per square foot, so it's going to take the annualized rent, it's going to divide it by their square footage, and come up with a price per foot for the facility. That's really important because if you start seeing a huge deviation in numbers here, either A, too high or too low, we want to identify if that is in line with market or not. Over here, it calculates the percentage of the total. So it will take the square footage they have, it will divide it by the total square footage to give you their percentage. So again, do they take 5%, 10%, 15, and on of the total square footage of the building? It's important to know because there are times when you have a tenant who takes 30% or 40% of the space. Well, that's a big risk. If that tenant goes out or leaves, then you have a big problem on your hands. So you want to make sure if somebody has that much square footage to get a little information about the tenant. Over here, you're going to notice a CAM, or what's called Common Area Maintenance. monthly amounts. Again, as I mentioned, it might be what's deemed a triple net lease, which means they're responsible for their pro rata share of expenses. So you will want to identify that again from either the lease, or they might have their own schedule of CAMs that they pay monthly or on an annual basis. So we want to notate that in each one of these items next to the tenant. Lease beginning, when is the actual start date? And again, we want to know, when did they actually move in? Could have been 10, 15 years ago, and they keep renewing their lease, but we want to know, how long have they been in there? So when was the very first date they actually moved into the facility? The lease ending, when does it actually end? You can get that from the rent roll or the lease. Here, if there's any rollover that's going to take place, is there any solutions we need to know about? Are they going to renew? If they're coming up within the next year. So if this lease ending happens to be within less than a year, the lender's going to want to know, what are you going to do to solve that problem? Because we're going to lose a tenant, potentially. Rent escalations, when is the next time the rent actually bumps, or increases, I should say. And so, again, you'll want to identify that within the lease provisions. Extensions, does the tenant have the ability to extend their lease? Is it 1 5-year renewal option? Is it 2 5-year renewal options? Whatever that is, we want to, again, make sure we understand that. And then again, if you have any comments, things that it'll be important for us to know, make sure to put that in that field. So again, this is a very simple and quick understanding of what is a rent roll and how to input the information in here. So thank you for watching this education video from Integrity Capital. God bless.